Well, welcome to everyone. I'm Louis Rickey, Executive Director of the Indiana Arts Commission, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the board's role during a crisis fundraising. Not-for-profit board members wear many hats, and one of their most crucial roles is ensuring responsible stewardship of community resources, which becomes even more important during a crisis. In this webinar, we'll discuss the board's fiscal responsibility to their organization and how they can integrate community responsibility, donor relations, and staff support in a crisis situation. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel of peer experts today. Ted Grossnickel, Senior Consultant and founder of Johnson, Grossnickel and Associates. Bill Stancikevich, Assistant Dean for External Relations and Director, the Fundraising School at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And of course, moderating today's question and answer portion of the webinar, which we have allotted a good amount of time for actually, is my commissioner, Dave Heist. Dave is joining us actually from Culver, where he, in addition to serving as a commissioner, he is chair of the Parkview Health Board of Directors. We've got a packed schedule, a lot to discuss today, and I'm going to hand it over to our peer experts to get us started with an overview. Ted and Bill, take it away. Ted, you may be on mute there.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. Thanks, Louis, and a pleasure to be here with Bill and David. I'll start with some opening comments for a few minutes, and then Bill will provide some as well. And then we're looking forward to your questions, but it's a pleasure to be here. As we think about the board's role in fiscal and fundraising responsibilities, especially during tough times, several things come to mind to me, and this is not only based upon what my colleagues and I at JJ have observed among our clients, but also for those of us who are volunteers. So what are the characteristics that board members of effective arts organizations do when it comes to securing financial support? What is the role? And I'd like to talk about several of these. There are 4 things on the screen: contribute, connect, endorse, and solicit. But let's unpack that a little bit more. You no doubt have all heard this. It does bear repeating because there's an important psychology behind it, but each board member does need to make a gift that's commensurate with their capabilities. That's certainly not only important because of the monetary value of the gift, but because, and perhaps more important than the monetary value, because the act of making that gift is an act of faith. It is a demonstration beyond words to your fellow board members, to staff members, to people in the community that you in fact do not only support the organization, but you're doing everything you can in a multidimensional way to assist it. So giving itself is very important. But we all know that there are many other ways to contribute besides the gifts of wealth. One of the most important things that we all should really think about doing and be creative if we can in finding ways to do is to connect our colleagues, those who are providing the arts programming or services, with prospective donors, with friends. If you have a staff member at your organization or members of the staff, to connect prospective supporters with them. There are lots of ways to do this. Sometimes it's just a conversation on the phone. Or if you see somebody while maintaining social distancing on the street, when they ask how you're doing, think about telling what you've been doing with your arts organization and see if you can strike a spark there. Share with them that part of you that finds the work with the arts organization so important. Next on the screen is shown as endorse. And this is actually one of my favorites, because when you should find yourself in a conversation with a person being asked for a gift, and I know some of the questions we'll talk about later today may go into how do we do cultivation and solicitation in a time of crisis and social distancing. But when you find yourself in that mode, and I hope you do, it's incredibly important for them to hear that you as a volunteer endorse the mission and you articulate what it is about the mission that makes the arts even more important today than they might have been 100 days ago. As I was talking to Lewis and thinking about this webinar a couple of weeks ago, I made the comment that it seems to me that just when we need the arts more than ever to help us interpret and make sense of a very different and rapidly changing world, here we have the arts undergoing this enormous challenge. And therein, I believe, lies an important part of the endorsement that we might make to our friends and prospective donors, that we believe in this and we want the arts organizations to be here in 6 months and 12 months and 18 months to help us continue to make sense out of what we are doing. Lastly, on the screen, you see solicitation. I would tell you that solicitation is not for everybody, but for those of you who do find the willingness, the belief in our organization to talk to somebody else and ask them to join you in making a gift, you can perform almost something magical. If you have a staff, make sure that you're doing this in full coordination with your staff. But if you can, please strongly consider, be prepared to say to somebody on behalf of the organization, I've made my gift, and I hope that you will consider doing so as well. But things have changed. We've gone through such an amazing, disturbing, thrilling, and scary time over the last 100 days. We know that they're not over. To what degree is this causing a change in the board's role? Here is where I would go to a way of reframing arguments for your organization. What are the things that cause somebody to perhaps think in a different way about why they might make a gift to an arts organization? We know that in the 08-09 recession, our arts giving went down substantially, and recovery to previous levels of giving took longer for the arts sector than for other sectors. Now here I'm poaching a bit on what my good colleague and very knowledgeable friend Bill Stancikevich could tell us much more about, but the main point I'm trying to suggest is you may run into people who would say to you when you talk to them about supporting the arts, gee, there are so many people out of work, there are so many other people hurting, why should I give to the arts? Is that as important a priority, for example, for me as other causes? And I believe that one of the most important roles for a board member, for an arts organization in this time, is in fact to make that response and to do so in a way that says it's crucial for arts support to continue, for your giving, even if you haven't been a donor before, to consider for the first time a gift to an arts organization. I believe board members are at the nexus of making those arguments in our communities to people to say, if we don't have a strong support of the arts now, we may not have those organizations in the future. It's doubly important for gifts to occur now. There's urgency here that maybe wasn't going to be perceived by them before. You might even go so far as to ask them to imagine a world where there are fewer arts organizations in 2021 or 22, because there wasn't support now when so many audiences are depleted or people can't attend areas, all the earned revenue is not there, etc. Now is a time for donors to come to the fore. And to me, that's the biggest single change. It's a mindset change and perhaps a behavioral change for arts organization board members to contemplate and hopefully be willing to do now and over the next 12 months. So I hope that board members will think strongly about a change to their job, not only the original four of connecting and soliciting, endorsing, and so forth, but helping to frame a new argument that is particularly timely. Doesn't mean that everybody will buy it, but hopefully a number of people will, and they'll understand the urgency and the importance, partly because of the passion that you bring to it. I'll pause there. You're going to hear from a person far more knowledgeable now than me, and that's my good friend and colleague, Bill Stansakevich.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. And I want to thank Louis for the invitation. I'm grateful for his leadership of a statewide organization of a sector that is so important, as Ted mentioned. We know that the arts reach people and touch our hearts and inspire our passions in unique ways. And now more than ever, whether it's the stress of the pandemic caused by COVID-19, whether it's the greater awareness of the pandemic of the lack of racial justice in too many situations, the arts can play a unique role in helping us through those two major world events that we're living in right now. I'm grateful that Louis is bringing us together today to do this. And also just want to commend Ted. It's such an honor to present alongside him today. Nearly 25 years ago, I was invited to lead a statewide organization, not in the arts, but in youth development, the Indiana Youth Institute. And when I joined the Indiana Youth Institute, the organization literally was going out of business. It had been around for 10 years at that point. There were 0 funders. There were 9 months of money left in the bank. Staff were quitting or their positions were being terminated. And there were 25 board seats and only 7 board members. And when I took the job, the remaining board members handed me a report. A statewide study had been conducted about the Youth Institute. And they said, basically, read this report, use this information, follow this report's recommendations. And I stayed at IYI for 17 years. When I left, the board was fully functioning, fully engaged. We had a talented staff. We were highly impactful. The budget was nearly $6 million. We had about $3 million operating reserves in the bank. We had a lot of success following the recommendations of that report that was written by Johnson Grossnickel. So I will always be grateful for Ted's wisdom and advice, which is why when I joined the fundraising school 5 years ago, one of my first meetings was with Ted, who modeled board leadership as a member of the Board of Visitors at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And Ted's wisdom and advice really fueled the growth that the fundraising school has enjoyed over these last 5 years. So it's a privilege to serve alongside Ted in this presentation at Louis's invitation. One of the things that I want to share with you is some of my own research in this subject to, again, the importance of board engagement. And one reason board members are not engaged is that we don't ask them to be engaged. And as I teach for the fundraising school around the nation, it's so interesting to hear nonprofit people say, well, board members already are giving me their time, or they have such status in the community, I just cannot ask them to donate. Or, you know, we didn't ask them up front, and so now I can't ask them now to be donors. And I can tell you, looking at some statistical analysis of survey data from BoardSource, which again is the gold standard on providing technical assistance to boards of directors at the national level. They do a survey of nonprofit CEOs every other year and found that there is a relationship between communicating expectations of fundraising to board members and the fact that they actually do participate. In fact, the odds of participation increase by 11 times over if we communicate those expectations. And you might be saying, well, we haven't communicated those expectations. So number one, would highly recommend, as people are joining your board, to communicate those expectations for fundraising. And again, the likelihood that they will increase 11-fold over. And you might be saying, well, okay, you've persuaded me, but we don't have those expectations yet. Well, there are a couple ways you can go about doing that. The study demonstrated that if we talk to our board members midway through a term, and especially the board members who are donating already are communicating that expectation in a peer-to-peer relationship, you increase the likelihood of other board members participating. So think about the board members who are fully engaged. Think about the board members who do donate, who are out soliciting, and kind of deputize them and have them be your posse, have them be your yeast working through the dough to encourage the other board members. One nonprofit that I interviewed, they went to 100% board giving in the first meeting when the board members who already were donating spoke up to their peers and said, hey, would you please join us? Also, in addition, you can say, all right, it was our bad. We did not communicate those expectations up front when you joined, but you have a term that's coming to an end. And before your new term starts, that new expectation is going to be in place. And you can decide if you want to stay on our board or not. We would understand if you chose not to. But if you do choose to stay, and we hope that you do, there will be this expectation of donating and developing other fundraising prospects for us. So again, this whole issue of expectations have a clear, strong predictive value in the fundraising of your board, both the donating that they do and the other donors that they find for you. All right. Then we want to take a look at leading in a crisis overall and what that means for fundraising. The academic research shows evidence-based best practices that, of course, start with protecting the safety of our people. Could be our staff, could be our volunteers. In the arts world, it could be our patrons, which is why, sadly, so many theaters are closed. And, you know, the fact that museums can open now can only have, you know, a certain percentage of occupancy of the number of people we can, you know, who run public art centers, you know, what those restrictions have looked like these last few months. The next thing we do is we protect our stuff. We protect our buildings, our technology. We protect our financial resources and things of that nature to be able to keep ourselves safe and keep our organization safe. And then we protect our reputation. You know, this is how we're showing people that we are keeping people safe. We are keeping our infrastructure safe. And the message I want to give to you today is you've always had your case for support. And what was true on February 29th is still true today. And for you to be able to fundraise based on that case. But how you are leading through these crises also now can become part of your case. Let people know how you responded to the COVID-19 crisis. Let people know how you're responding to this wonderful emergence of awareness of the importance of racial justice and the related issues. And that also can become part of your case for support on how your nonprofit is responding through such a time as this. As Ted mentioned, that you know, certainly arts organizations are hit first and take longer to recover. I certainly associate with that comment. We just have some new research, though, coming out from our school that is showing some stages of charitable giving through a crisis, including through economic downturns. First of all, we know from previous research that charitable giving in response to a natural disaster, like a hurricane, like a flood, like a tsunami, like an earthquake, usually happens in about a 16-week window. And then the giving related to that crisis dissipates. Well, we're coming up on 16 weeks, right? If you look from mid-March, April, May, June, kind of early to mid-July is when we get to 16 weeks. So any COVID-related giving initially is likely now going to dissipate. And I can tell you anecdotally, I'm hearing that from many nonprofits that we teach for the fundraising school across the country, that they saw a huge surge early on and now not so much anymore, which means either donors are done, perhaps, or they're going to return to the nonprofits they supported all along. And now this new study that's going to come out in July is showing these seasons that, again, there's this giving to the immediate needs, like the food banks. You know, very intuitive, right? That we want to make sure people are fed, especially with the significant amount of job loss, notwithstanding today's positive job report from the federal government. But now what our researchers are seeing is kind of this shift into recovery. What other nonprofits are out there that we want to make sure can recover now that the giving has happened towards immediate need, with the expectation then we'll enter this season of resilience, that the organizations that have survived, the organizations that have been creative, the the organizations that have been able to adapt to the new environment. We want them to be resilient. This is where the arts organizations could come in, that donors might now be more willing to look at. With this initial immediate need season of 16 weeks coming to a close, it could be a new time for arts organizations to fundraise based on your case, based on how you led through crisis leadership, and most effectively, if all of your board members are donating, all of your board members are helping find other donors and making that great case that Ted reminded us of. Well, let's just imagine if we're not around in 2021 or 2022, and that's what's going to happen if we're not donating. We know, of course, that there's this wealth effect of giving, and this is something we're watching very closely. We know that people give primarily out of their values, out of their passions, out of their life history. They feel a responsibility to give back. Some people give because of their religious faith, including to the arts, all sorts of reasons why people give. But how much they give and when they give often is determined by their wealth or their perception of wealth. So we need to be watching these economic indicators moving forward. Today's employment report, certainly positive news. The latest news out of the stock market, we know that the S&P 500 in a 12-month period from January 1 to December 31st is a very strong predictor of the trend of charitable giving moving forward. As of close of business yesterday, that market was only down 4%. Kind of a surprise when we think about how horrible the economy's been these last 3 or 4 months, when we literally slammed the brakes on the world economy. The S&P is only down 4%. And it's in a range of where we were back in November of 2019. And when I was fundraising for the School of Philanthropy back in November of 2019, I thought the stock market was great, because that year-to-date comparison, it was up double digits at that time. So that's a hopeful sign. There are a couple of other interesting signs that are out there as well. First of all, the national savings rate. In April, the national savings rate went up 33%. That was a 1-month record. Now we know, what were people doing? Well, I might lose my job. There might be a second spike that'll slam the brakes on the economy again. Wow, I went through the 2008-09 Great Recession without a savings account. I'm not making that mistake again. All these reasons people are saving money. Those who are still employed and seeing their discretionary spending plummet because they're not going to Disney World, they're not going on vacation, they can't eat out as much, and so forth. But then what happened in May? We saw a 17% increase in consumer spending, a 1-month record of increase. Now, still not back to where consumer spending was in February, but here's what the data also showed. People were purchasing big stuff, purchasing cars, purchasing new rooms on the back of their houses, purchasing swimming pools in the back of their yards, meaning people who still are working and through the comfort of their laptops, through the safety of their front doors, that they can work in place and have additional discretionary income, started spending on big ticket items. So I discussed this with one of our economists on our research team, Dr. Patrick Rooney, who perhaps many of you know, national expertise on the wealth effect of giving. And what he identified with our colleague, John Bergdahl, is that when people save money, initially that depresses charitable giving, because again, I'm saving it for a reason. But then within a year, if that money isn't spent, we now know that that becomes wealth. It's no longer seen as liquid, it's seen as wealth, and it gives people confidence with their charitable giving. We know that when people have more money, they spend more money. When people have more money, they save more money. And when people have more money, they give more money. And so those are two statistics, the savings rate and the the consumer spending rate, that really caught our attention. In the second half of this calendar year, are people going to be more willing to, maintain their charitable giving? A poll by Gallup right after the pandemic started showed that 91% of Americans told surveyors that they will maintain giving at their current levels or increase in the next 12 months. 66% said maintain at current levels, 25% said increase. Maintaining at current levels, 2019 was the second best year of charitable giving in recorded history. Boy, that would be nice to maintain amidst the pandemic and the current issues related to racial justice. So let's hope that's true. In fact, somebody I know Ted knows very well, Rick Dunham, who this year is leading the Giving Institute, which publishes Giving USA. When the Giving USA data came out, Rick did not predict strong charitable giving, but he did say, he told the Chronicle of Philanthropy, he would not be surprised if these current economic trends continue in the second half of the second year, big if, yes, but if these charitable trends, or if these economic trends continue in the second half of the year, Rick would not be surprised for charitable giving to at least match 2019, which again was the second best year in charitable giving history. So again, we're watching those data, no predictions. Certainly there are challenges. Organizations are shrinking. We know nonprofits are laying off. About 1.5 million of the job loss nationally has been in the nonprofit sector, but we're also watching these wealth effects moving forward. One other key, and this will be my last slide before we turn to David for questions, is collaboration. The research shows that some nonprofits add programs during times of economic downturn because they create a new source of revenue. Certainly nonprofits can reduce programs as well and reduce staff. We know that's rather obvious. We know that nonprofits can look for opportunities for earned income, new ways to sell things to bring dollars in the door. And can you be resourceful in that regard? And then lastly, nonprofits also through advocacy can increase the revenue generation during economic downturns, because you're out in the public square, you gain even greater awareness for your nonprofit organization. Fifth on that list is collaboration. That can you collaborate with other arts organizations? Can you collaborate with youth and education organizations? Education schools are looking for more resources online. Can you be part of that solution? One of the examples was a humanity organization, Mount Vernon, the historic home of George and Martha Washington, where they had all this digital content ready to go for their museum. And then the pandemic hit, and they let school districts across the United States become aware of this digital material that now the school districts can use. That's an opportunity for collaboration, which could lead to revenue generation down the line, either through earned income or through charitable giving. One key about collaboration, though, is that people only want to collaborate with strong organizations. So you need to emphasize your strength and the strength of partners, because nobody wants to collaborate and take on other nonprofits or organizations' problems. So I will leave it at there and turn it to Dave Heist for any questions he might have or that you have brought our way as well.
Great. Hey, thanks, Bill. And thanks, Ted. You guys really got us off to a really strong start. I'm sure everyone who's listening really can see the depth that both of you have in fundraising and the experiences that you've seen over the years. I want to start out with a question, and we've received a number of good questions, both in registration and also on Facebook. I'd also encourage those watching that if you have additional questions or comments, please share them on Facebook, and we'll continue to work through those through the balance of the hour. But to kick things off, and I'll address this first to Ted, but I'd also like Bill's reaction as well. Both of you talked about the importance of board members having engagement or being engaged. And you talked about the need to give to the organization. And just curiosity, can you both kind of share with us what engagement looks like? Is it giving to the board? Is it more than that? Just your reactions, I think, can be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a swing at that, at least to get started, Dave. Thanks. If I understand your question, it's how are there other ways besides giving that board members can provide, other forms of support that board members can provide. A little bit of that is what I was putting out, perhaps as a bit of a placeholder in my earlier remarks. It's certainly giving, but in addition, having a willingness to deeply understand the finances and the fiscal trend lines of the organization. Bill mentioned earlier having a sense of how much money is there, what is your spending rate, what's the trajectory that your organization has, and just being fully informed as a board member, I think, is one of the most important things, probably doubly important nowadays, that a board member can do, because it's out of that knowledge of exactly how the arts organization is experiencing this time and what its trajectory is by October, by December, by February, that is going to hopefully grow your own passion to make the story better known. But it's also going to be a type of knowledge that will be respected by those with whom you speak, especially about gifts. They'll count on you to be able to say, here's how we're weathering this, here's where our pain points are, and here's where gifting is really going to be particularly helpful. The second thing that I would encourage board members to be able to do is to be able to speak with some specificity, or for want of a better term, precision, about particular programs that the arts organization thinks might be the ones first to come back. Are those opportunities for them to bring to prospective donors and say, as a part of the resilience phase, if we go back to what Bill was suggesting as ways that people think about giving in a time like this, can we begin as board members to fashion those arguments around recovery and around resilience for organizations by holding up specific programs that might be the first ones to come back, or the ones that, if they're not first, but in fact are going to be further down the road, are going to need more support right now to stay in place. Our colleagues and I at JGA are aware of an arts organization that is attempting to provide an array of types of support, so that the donors with whom they're talking don't hear one story, they can hear several ways of being supportive. Some people may want to help with facility maintenance. Some people may want to help with artist grants. Some people may want to help with other types of programming, but as a board member, if you're tuned in and know enough specificity about the particular ways in which your organization is being affected, then you can articulate that, and that's another very important way for a board member to help, in addition to writing a check. Dave, I don't know if I got to your question. I hope I got at least close to it. And to save me, once again, I'm going to turn it over to Bill now, what he says.
Well, when I think about board members and engaging them, there are just several techniques that we can utilize, and that also came out in my study, the nonprofits that I interviewed. One is certainly we're continuing to inform our board members at board meetings about our programs and our services. And one way to do that is with a miracle moment or a mission moment at the start of each board meeting, where you tell a story of impact. And in an arts organization, it could be a patron who visited, or a school child, a school teacher who participated at the Arts Center. Just some form of story of showing how the Arts Center is making a difference in the local community. One of the nonprofits that I interviewed said that a board member on the spot doubled her gift immediately after the mission moment. Doesn't always happen that way, but again, it reminds us. Remember, our board members, they're working full time. They're raising their families. Even our board members who are retired, they're living active lives in retirement. They're not with our nonprofit every day like we are. That mission moment really captivates and centers their attention once again. Invite them to your events, invite them to your programs, not to manage them, but to observe and to participate. That's another way to keep them engaged. And then lastly, is to kind of take this head on, is a lot of our board members are hesitant to be engaged with fundraising, usually for one of three reasons. One is they say, it's just not good manners. I was told not to talk about religion, politics, or money with my friends and my neighbors, so I'm really hesitant to fundraise. Second of all, it makes me awkward to ask people for money. It's just very uncomfortable. And then third, I'm going to owe somebody else who gives a gift to me, that if I ask Ted for a gift, someday I know Ted's going to ask me for a gift since he helped me out. So a few different things there. Number one, we don't talk about money. Well, you're not talking about money. You're inviting people to join you in the way you're making the world a better place. That's what fundraising is doing. You're inviting people to join you in the way your nonprofit, your arts organization is making the world a better place. Let board members know that. Second of all, fundraising, as the founder of the fundraising school, Henry Rosso, said, is the gentle art of teaching what? The joy of giving. You're not asking people for money. You're giving them a chance to experience the joy of giving in the way your nonprofit is making the world a better place. And it's not about you. You don't have to feel uncomfortable because it's about the impact of your nonprofit. It's about the mission of your nonprofit. It's about the people and the cause served by your nonprofit. It's not about you, the board member, asking for that gift. Third, the quid pro quo. Yep, that's part of life. That's called reality. And I probably will give Ted's organization a gift because he gave one to me. And that's just being real. Get over yourself, right? So those are often the three reasons a board member says they're hesitant. We can disabuse them of that notion through constant training, through constant reinforcement by having other board members who are already there and engaged, encouraging their peers, and that can help them be engaged as a donor and as a fundraiser for your nonprofit.
You know, and there's something that you said, Bill, that I think is really important, and it's maybe been implicit in what you and I are saying, and maybe we need to make explicit, and that is, at least if you look at the experience of arts organizations and many other organizations from 2008 and the recession, those organizations that did a better job of just engaging people, even if they weren't asking them for gifts, but they were keeping them tuned in, they were keeping them informed about what the organization was doing, they were in touch with them, had a quicker recovery on their giving, and they tended to come back from donors making larger gifts. The organizations that sort of took counsel of their fears, to that first point of Bill's of saying, well, gee, you know, what will people think of me if I ask? Those people who did not engage with people, either giving or just cultivating them, tended to be with organizations that did not recover as well. So even if you're worried about asking for a gift, start in another way. Just start with a conversation. Just start with a conversation. Dave probably took too long to answer that, but what's our next question?
You both gave excellent responses, very, very helpful for the group. Okay, this is one question that came in on Facebook, and let me just work through this, and then we'll let Bill start it off, and Ted can follow. Given everything that's going on around us right now, what are the best practices on ways to ask previous year donors and or corporate sponsors for money during the time of COVID-19?
Well, it's a great question. And your best chance for success is by staying with the folks already on your donor list. Maybe the hardest thing right now is to attract new donors to the organization. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Some of those practices of attracting new donors through direct mail, social media, special events, including online special events, certainly are worthy of consideration, but you're going to have your best success most likely with the folks already on your donor database. And just to remember that if your case was strong on February 29th, before all the lockdowns started in March, your case is still strong now. Remember that philanthropy, the essence of philanthropy is a message of hope. We have the audacity to believe that we can make the world a better place. One of our founders, Robert Payton, I know is a good friend of Ted's, said that in his book, Understanding Philanthropy. We think we're bringing improvement to the world. That's a message of hope. And so when you're bringing your information and yes, your request to your donors, you're bringing them hope during a time when there's just so much stress and complexity more than ever before in our world. So to just have that confidence to fundraise is the big message there. As for corporate giving, it's a whole new story here in 2020. We know that in 18 and 19, corporate giving had some of its best years ever. But now, of course, with the great contraction in the labor market, the corporate sector is just a great unknown. Ted, I don't know if you have any new information on the corporate sector based on what we saw from Giving USA, but it's a big question mark in terms of what corporate giving is going to look like beyond the giving to the food pantries and things like that we've seen thus far.
Yeah, it's really an interesting point, Bill. The research from Giving USA certainly is showing some movement, some real movement in the percentages of all giving that is coming from corporations and foundations. It's been on the march a little bit, if you will. It's been growing in recent years. I think that Rick Dunham, whom you mentioned earlier, is probably right. There's a good possibility that corporate and foundation giving is going to increase in 2020. I'll go out on a limb and say that. Now, a part of it could be related to a very, very recent and very exciting and dynamic thing underway in foundation giving. Many of you may have heard what the Ford Foundation, led by Darren Walker and others, are doing, which is to take on debt to give more. They're doing social bonds. They can take on debt at extremely low interest rates, and that's going to allow them to have an extra $1 to $1.5 billion in funds to contribute at a time of great need because of the pandemic and the calls for social justice and equity. There's a lot to unpack there, and I don't need to go into it all now, but I believe there are certainly indicators that suggest that corporate and foundation giving is likely to increase where those places are capable. And I do want to loop back, Dave, on a part of your question to something that, again, was mentioned by Bill earlier. We do not want to make the mistake of, donors are not monolithic. There are many people that, in fact, still do have the funds to contribute. And the work that our firm does, and in many other member firms of the Giving Institute, are seeing that, yes, some people have been badly hurt by this economic downturn, but there are other people that do have funds, and they not only can continue to give, but they want to. Most people give because they want to have an impact. Tax deductibility and other things as a factor rates reasonably lowly. So there are people there with funds. Let's remember what Bill said. Let's not take it personally if we talk to somebody and they're not in a position to help. But let's go to other people who do have the funds to help. And in fact, might very much appreciate the conversation that you bring to them through the lens of hope about your organization.
Great comments from both of you. Just following up on that, Ted, you mentioned folks who have funds to give. So if I'm an organization, how do I figure out which of my donors are the ones that I should be spending the most time with?
Well, it's a really good question. There's an array of answers there, Dave. At a very simple, basic level, as a board member, one of the best things you can do is have your ear to the ground. You can know people in your region or your community, and you know if they're corporations, if they're places of work, their circumstances. So you're going to have some sense of being able to say, among the circle of donors that our ORTS organization has, to review the lists of those names and say, from your own experience and that of other board members, who might be in a position to be of help. That's what I would call the basic knowledge of the immediate ground approach. Many organizations are also able to take advantage of more sophisticated and I would say reasonably inexpensive tools of electronic screening that would allow an arts organization, for example, to have a professional electronic screening done. There are many firms that provide this service and who can bring a report back to you that shows, of all the people on your list, who are your best prospective donors, who are the people that can, in fact, make larger gifts, and who, according to nationally accessible records, have in fact been giving to other organizations. What is most interesting to us as a result of looking at previous times of crises, the 08 recession, the 01 dot-com bubble, even going back to 87 with the Black Friday crash. In most of those cases, the places that were able to continue those conversations, as we stated before, and to do it on the basis of of knowing their best prospects were the ones that had a much faster recovery. That would be how I'd respond.
Good. You're dating yourself a little bit when you're going back to 1987, Ted. But
when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
okay, here's another question. Kind of follows up on kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about. It comes from the group. What does the conversation, including the big ask, sound like? What should you consider when making a large ask during the crisis at hand? Bill, do you want to take that?
Well, large is relative, right? What's a major gift? A major gift is major to that donor based on their giving history. Major gift is relative to my budget. I understand a lot of the arts organizations have smaller budgets, and quite frankly, to a smaller nonprofit, a $5,000 gift might seem large and major, and to the donor might seem very typical. So it's a little hard to understand that question without knowing more about each particular nonprofit. But I will say this: if it's considered large for both the donor and the nonprofit, that could happen on the first meeting, but rarely does that happen on the first meeting. So that's thing number one, is that there's cultivation. And there's lots of listening that happens first. For those of us who are fully able, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, we're observing and we're listening 80% of the time. Now, first of all, when I learned that, my marriage got a lot better, my parenting got a lot better, and my fundraising got a lot better. And so it's not about the asking. You've done all your homework, you know your story, you know your challenges. It's about observing and listening, asking the donor, how's this pandemic affecting you? What is the health situation with your family? What is your work situation? Or the other is, these issues with racial justice that are emerging. What is that meaning for your company? What is that meaning for the organizations you're with, for your family, things of that nature? Listen, 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 actively listen, responsive conversation. And through this whole time, you're gaining a deeper understanding of why this particular donor gives, right? Again, there are several similarities with charitable giving, but each of us would have our own distinctions as to why we give. And that's the art of fundraising, where we're observing and we're listening. And then you then realize it's the right time to make the ask. How do you know it's the right time? How I wish there was a formula. How I wish there was an A plus B equals C. What happens is you get a sense that there's a saturation point in the conversation. You're not exploring new ground. You're not advancing the conversation any further. And that gives you the telltale sign that the donor is ready to receive a major request from you. Sometimes the donor herself or himself might say, hey, I'd like to talk with you now about a gift. But usually you start sensing where that conversation is reaching that saturation and it's time to make a gift. Ted, how do you advise your clients in that regard? Because we get that question all the time. What's the magic moment to make the ask? And sadly, at least with all the research we do, we haven't found that magic formula yet.
We haven't found the magic moment either, but the answer for any of us who are doing that kind of asking resides very clearly in what you were saying, Bill, about listening. Your listening skills have to be there, and the trick with that is that takes some time. It's very likely not going to be the first time you see this person. It's likely going to be many visits, but you have to allow yourself time to hear, to ask questions, and to really actively hear what people are telling you. But let's say that you've done that. Let's say that we've gotten to the point that Bill was describing as a saturation point. I am a big believer in doing one other thing. And I think there are a number of people in this profession who will disagree with me, so this may be contrary advice. I believe in asking permission. I don't believe in the ambush. I don't think that we ought to go to somebody and think that somehow by dint of our magical voice or the special words that we use, that we're going to somehow magically convince them to make a gift or make a larger gift. I think rather it's when they've been heard, and if I can say to them, would it be okay with you if we talked about a gift? That the control is given to them. The control should not be for you. I'd say don't worry, throw control out the window.
Hmm.
Let the donor have control, but ask permission. Is this a good time for us to talk about a gift? If they say no, then you can say, can you tell me why? And when do you think it might be a good time for us to have a talk? Or are there other things they still need to know about you and your organization? Let them answer for you. And on the other hand, if you say, is this a good time? May I have your permission for us to talk about a gift? And they say yes.
Good.
Then the dynamic has changed, and it's.
Are you wrapped up there, Ted?
You
They
know,
have.
Dave, I
Yep.
can amplify on Ted's wise advice there. And as we think about board engagement in this whole issue as well, a lot of times with fundraising, the hardest thing is to get the meeting with the donor. Even sometimes with your current donors, but especially with new donors. And this is where board members, if they make the first phone call, if they make the first email, I think I would always get the meeting if my board members reached out first. And I think if I tried to reach out first, I never got the meeting. And so getting the meeting can sometimes be the biggest challenge. And then here's the thing to know. And again, we don't know the exact time. I spoke to one major gift fundraiser who all of his donors were in Manhattan. And he said he would walk into a Wall Street leader's office and she would say, you've got 30 minutes. And at the end of 30 minutes, you're going to get a yes or a no, right? Then I was speaking to a college president who raised a 7-figure gift. And he said it took him 10 years to get that gift. So your answer is somewhere between 30 minutes and 10 years to know when. But getting the meeting can often be the biggest challenge. Our board members can help us get those meetings. And then no donor or prospective donor ever, when you brought up either, hey, can I start talking with you about a gift, or you feel it's reached that saturation point and you want to start have that conversation, no donor or prospective donor ever went, what? You're asking me for a charitable gift? I had no idea. Said no donor ever. They know why you're there. That's why they kept taking the meetings. And that's part of the confidence you can have in making the philanthropic request.
Thanks, Bill. We've lost Ted, but we're working on the technology, so hopefully we'll get him back before the end. We've got time for one more question. And this is one that I think is especially pertinent with arts organizations. So let me just share this, Bill, and you can give it a shot. If your organization is going to be largely shuttered for the foreseeable future, how do you position a donor ask which might not have an immediate impact beyond sustaining the organization? Take it away.
Yeah, number one, the donors who are closest to you are going to be the donors who are most receptive to that conversation. Those that have been with you the longest, those who have been with you, at higher levels. We think about donors who help us retire debt, for example, or donors who lead the way on a capital campaign, or donors who are most likely to make a planned gift. Always are the donors who've been with us the longest, and usually middle of our donor pyramid, maybe even the top of our donor pyramid. And those are the folks you likely are going to have the most success with in saying, we have to shut everything down right now. We hope to be back next year. We hope to be back 2 years from now, but we still have some basic expenses that we have to meet, whether it's, basic staff expenses and benefits. Maybe it's some basic building expenses just to, maintain the roof and the HVAC equipment while the building is shut down. Those are the donors we have the best chance of impacting. And then, of course, the obvious answer is, what can we do online? Is there anything we can do to shift online? Think about Andrew Lloyd Webber bringing, Broadway plays onto Netflix, for example, or again, the Mount Vernon home, putting things online for people to see. Is there anything we can do electronically? We see that with our religious congregations. Some of them were online already, even the ones that were not. Boy, they had to figure that out in a hurry to get online. So again, probably the donors who've been with you longest and are closest to you will be most receptive to that message. And then are there any creative ways you can do to be flexible and adapt to have something out there? I mean, I'm just going to make something up here. I mean, if you're in an art museum, can you have an outdoor event? while the weather's still nice? Can you take your play outside? Can you take your music performance outside, just to have some sort of exposure to people? That type of creativity is called for now more than ever.
Those are great comments. I really appreciate that, Bill. I want to thank both Ted and Bill for being a part of this webinar. And I think the insights that you provided for the group are things that are just very valuable. So I appreciate your expertise in sharing that with the group. I'm going to turn this back over to Louis, who's going to wrap us up.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today on Facebook. And thank you to our peer experts, Bill and Ted and Dave, for your expert and hands-on management of this webinar for the questions. Really appreciate it. We'll be sending out an email on Monday with a recording of the webinar and any resource material that our panelists might suggest you refer to. We want you to have a safe, healthy, and good and happy 4th of July weekend. Continue to do the good work that you do, and we will join you in the next webinar, and have a great day. Thanks again to everyone who participated.